chapter 4, language. Okay, this is a pretty complicated section when you really get into it, so we're just going to sort of talk about some of the main ideas. Okay, one of the big ideas in this language section is the idea that fundamentally our language and the way that we talk about things and the methods that we use to talk about things, all of this product, all of this linguistics, all of these words, all of these notions of how to communicate are all things that derive fundamentally from nature. Okay? Early on in this section, he talks about how specific words derive from natural elements. But that part, is sometimes a little bit problematic linguistically. But some things he does say, do hold a lot of weight. As he says, an enraged man is a lion, a cunning man is a fox, a firm man is a rock, a learned man is a torch. Okay, and then he goes on to say, these are not the dreams of a few poets here and there, but man is an analogist and studies relations in all objects. That's a really fantastic idea. Man is an analogist. That basically we as human beings are constantly out there seeking to make connections, seeking to, find like, oh, this is like this, that we utilize metaphor. As Aristotle said, metaphor is a fine skill, that it is a skill that sort of denotes and distinguishes, a brilliant mind from one that is less brilliant, because metaphor is an understanding of connection. Okay, Emerson understood this fundamentally, but he is making the argument that that ability to connect, that ability to seek metaphor is something that is derived specifically from nature. Okay, he also even says, in like manner, the memorable words of history and the proverbs of nations consist usually of a natural fact selected as a picture or parable of a moral truth. And he gives a bunch of examples. A rolling stone gathers no moss. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Uh, Make hay whilst the sun shines. The last ounce broke the camel's back. Okay, all of these sort of idioms that we have in our speech are all things that you can see are derived directly from nature. Okay, so he's making this sort of complex argument that our way of communicating is something that always comes from nature. Then he does get into some really complicated ideas. One of my favorite complicated ideas he puts forth is this one. He says, have mountains and waves and skies no significance but what we consciously give them? That's a tough question. Have mountains and waves and skies no significance but what we consciously give them? Here he's starting to get into this idea of what you could call innatism. Okay, innatism is sort of the idea that things have fundamental properties within themselves, and that we as human beings then survey or observe this thing, this object, and then we sort of can witness that innate element within them. He's asking this issue there. Is that really true? Is there such thing as an innate element when there's a mountain out there? Does that mountain have meanings, in and of itself, or are those meanings just things that we give to it? So this gets into all sorts of really heavy-duty philosophy, okay, like Kantian ideas of the thing in itself. Can we really know the object in itself, okay, or are we always sort of condemned to seeing it through our own lens? All this sort of stuff. That's a lot of heady philosophical stuff that we don't necessarily have to deal with, but it is something that Emerson isn't shy to bring up here. Okay, so all of this type of stuff sort of comes back to some of these big ideas, and he sort of closes down this section by really getting into some big time spiritual issues. He quotes George Fox, who was an English Quaker, as saying, "Every scripture is to be interpreted by the same spirit which gave it forth." And this is a huge sort of idea and how it relates to language, right? Because it's that sort of idea that to really understand any scripture, you have to be in the mindset of the person who initially wrote it, because that was the person who was comprehending nature's relationship to language purely in that moment. Man, that is some big stuff to deal with. And I don't blame you if you have trouble trying to wrap your mind around that, because it's a difficult one. If you wanted to get really theological about it, you could start asking the question of, is it possible to really get into the mindset of the the same spirit which gave it forth. In the biblical sense, are you really going to be able to get into the mindset that Moses was in, when he was writing Deuteronomy, if that's the interpretation you want to take? Is that something that's possible? Okay, that's another huge issue. Emerson doesn't necessarily answer that question for us, but it's just another example of how Emerson isn't afraid to throw out huge ideas, giant questions, massive considerations, and then sort of say, like, you have fun with that.